Fully informed about everything happening around the church. As we come together today, we want to remind you that God has a special message for you. Our hope is that you will experience His love in a profound way. Thank you for being a part of this gathering. Let's open our hearts and minds to receive God's message through Pastor Dylan.
Good morning, church. How are we this morning? I heard one over there. That was good. She's ready to go this morning. I just want to give a quick shout out to Pastor Chuck, who's not here today, obviously. Hopefully he's watching online, and hopefully he learns how to preach a little bit, you know? I'm just kidding. Hopefully he watched first service. Actually, I don't even know why I said that. That was dumb. No, they're away on their vacation, so hopefully they're having a good time. They gave me a microphone, so I'm going to preach to you today. We're going to be in the book of Genesis 1. So if you want to start moving your Bibles there, it's the very beginning, so it should be right there. But I did want to let you know, if you have kids with you, like elementary age kids, this is just a little disclaimer that we're going to be talking about some sensitive subjects today. So if you have elementary age kids with you and you don't want to answer questions, this might be the time to get them out and get them into Dayspring Kids. If you do want to answer questions, then just leave them there and we'll see if they have questions or not. So I just wanted to put that out there first. Genesis 1, starting at verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our own image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, the livestock and all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in His own image. In the image of God He created them. Male and female He created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it, reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and the animals that scurry along the ground." Then God said, "Look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth and all the fruit trees for your food. And I have given every green plant as food for all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, and the small animals that scurry along the ground, everything that has life." And that is what has happened. Then God looked over all He had made, and He saw that it was very good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the sixth day. This is the word of the Lord. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank You so much for this time that we shared together this morning. And Lord, as we enter into this message, Lord, I just pray that You would prep our hearts and our minds for what it is that You're going to say to us today. That You would begin to move inside of us, that Your Spirit would be with us. That little poke or prod that You're trying to give us, Lord, I pray now that You would speak to us in a profound way. That you would be with us during this time. That You would cover us with Your Spirit, Lord. Lord, I just pray that whatever I mess up, and I will mess up, Lord, that Your words would be heard today. That Your Spirit would be present. In Jesus' name, amen. Just know I am going to mess up, okay? So what we're going to be talking about today is, what does it mean to be human? So we're going to be diving into what it means to be human. And so I thought I'd start with this funny story. I forget what we were doing. My wife and I, we were outside, probably watching the kids play or whatever it was. And I had left my phone inside. So I said, "Hey, can I use your phone? I got to look something up." She said, "Sure." So she hands me her phone. I open up Safari and I look at it, and I shocked, just utterly shocked. I opened up Safari. She had 99 tabs open. 99 tabs. So I turned to her And I was like, what kind of monster are you? Why do you have 99 tabs open? And she said, well, if I'm doing something, I open something so I can leave it there so I can come back to it. I was like, oh yeah, like a bookmark? Like a bookmark? She said, well, sometimes I get busy, so I just leave it up there. Now granted, she is at home with 4 of our kids, 3 of which are under the age of 3. So, a lot of free time is not happening for her. So I get that part, and I was like, oh, okay. So I had a choice, fellas. And if you're married, you'll understand this. And if you're single, it's coming if you get married, okay? So I had this choice, husbands. I could listen, care for her, understand her, or I could solve the problem. Man, I fail that test every time. So in my great wisdom, I was like, I know how I can fix that for you, okay? This is what you do. You make tabs and you organize them. Like I got tabs for backpacking, for trails I want to hike, for bills, for all these sorts of things. Like I have 2 tabs open, that's it. 99 tabs. And so she looks at me, all right? She looks at me and says, that's what works for you. This is what works for me. Oh, okay, all right. So we got to put this in practice. Okay? So we were at, I forget what sporting goods store. We were at some sporting goods store. And I was looking at sleeping bags. And I was like, hey, honey, watch this. And so I pull out my phone, pull out my tabs, pull out the backpacking thing, pull up the same sleeping bag, because it's organized, right? And I was comparing prices online to in-house. And I was like, you see that? That's how it's done. And I think she just like waved her hand like this. And she said, I'm going to go look at something that's away from you. I think that's what she said. So that didn't end well for me. But there is a real-time update too. So that's like, I was going to end the story there and we were going to jump into the message, but then something happened last night as well. So it's like, you're getting real time right now. So it's like 9:30, 10 o'clock, right? We're getting ready for bed. I'm old. I go to bed early, all right? So it's 9:30, 10 o'clock. I'm putting the dog away. And she looks at me and she's like, hey, by the way, we're getting ready to go on vacation. She says, hey, by the way, can you grab the laundry detergent out of the laundry room, put it with the stuff that we're packing so that we can have it on vacation? I was like, oh, vacation, like when we leave on Monday? Like, why are you talking about laundry detergent right now? How does that even come up? And she's like, this is like, must be her new thing. She's like, 99 tabs. Everything's running through my head. I'm like, oh man, I should have never gave her that punchline that she's going to use constantly with me. So, we're a little different, my wife and I. I think we get along pretty well, but we're pretty different. We're all made in the image of God, but we're all created a little bit different. So as we jump into the creation accounts, I first want to start at Genesis 2:4. So Genesis 2:4 says this is the account of the creation of the heavens and the earth. Now, why is this part important? This is like the linchpin verse right here. So there's 2 separate creation accounts, okay? So Genesis 1 through 2:4 is the first one, and then 2:4b through, I think it's like 31 or 33 or whatever it is the second creation account. So there's 2 separate creation accounts, right? And so this verse, this is the account of the creation of the heavens and the earth, is the kind of turning point. And if you go through the book of Genesis, you'll find like 7 or 8 of this exact statement, and the author used this as a linchpin to kind of transition between different stories. Another time, another day, right? But what we need to understand about the 2 creation stories is that they're complementary. They're not contradictory. So oftentimes we think there's 2 sets of stories that they must be battling against each other, when in actuality they're actually working together. Now, how many of you are comic book fans? Oh, nobody. This illustration is going to go terrible. Not one. One. I got one. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you. Well, where's your husband? He went to another church. He heard Pastor Chuck was gone and Dylan was preaching, so he went to another church. Well, let him know I shared a comic book story, okay? This illustration is going to go terrible. But I'm going to power through, okay? So in the superhero world, okay, so I'll try to dumb it down for everybody. That was a poor choice of words. I'm going to water it down. That's what I meant to say. Everyone knows who Superman is, right? Raise your hand if you know Superman. We know. All right. See, now we're back in. So Superman is like this cosmic hero, right? He's up in the sky, he's up in space, he's flying around, he's doing all the big stuff. And that's the first creation story, is God's looking over everything. He's putting the chaos waters in order. He's the cosmic creation story, Superman. Now the second creation story is like Batman. Now Batman's on the street level. What? I didn't even get to the punchline yet. That's mine too. So Batman's like this street level hero, right? He's like fighting crime, jumping from building to building. He's the best superhero, by the way, just to put that out there. But he's more like street level. And that's what the Genesis 2 second creation account is. It's like street level, on the ground, making man. See how I did that there? Okay. So, and then when they work together, all right, so you might not know this about DC Comics, but they have a thing called the Justice League. It's kind of like the Avengers. You know the Avengers, right? So it's when the superheroes come together to work together to fight the evil. So these two creation stories work together. It's not landing. Okay. Anyways, these two work together to tell the story of what it means to be made in the image of God. All right, no comic book stuff. Got it. All right. Stick to Marvel. You're on my list. Genesis 1:26. Let's go there. Let's try to get back on track here now, all right? That's enough out of you. Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our own image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, and all the wild animals on earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." Now, the first part, see where it says, "Let us in our image"? We're going to take those plural words and we're going to set them over here. We're not going to touch them today, all right? Just set them there. Just let them go. It's okay. We're not going to talk about them today. We don't have enough time. What we are going to focus on is where it says, and I love the NLT for this, it says, "Let us make human beings in our image." Now, most translations will say, "Let us make man in our image." And that's why I appreciate the NLT. It uses human beings. Because the word that they're using there, Adam, is best translated as human. And it's not a specific gender. That's important. That it is the human being, the Adam. Second word that we need to pick out of there. They will reign over the fish in the sea. So we can already see that God wants to create human beings in his image so that they will reign. Interesting that God would give kingship, basically, royalty, to humans. Most of the time that was reserved for kings and queens, and most of the creation stories in the ancient Near East use kings and queens as their creation story. But this is what's different here is God's giving royalship to everyone. He's given it to the people. And people reflected on this. You ready? King David, Psalm 8. "What are mere mortals that you should think about them? Human beings that you should care for them." I love that first part because how many times have you felt that you weren't valued? How many times have you ran to social media to see how well you stack up against your friends or your family? Or even in conversations with people, you're secretly counting how you stack up. Where is my value? Or your friend comes to you who just got back from Hawaii, and you're like, "Man, that sounds great." "Not really. I wish I was in Hawaii." And then he says, "I got caught in a riptide." And you're like, "Yes. I'm kidding. Mostly kidding. But how often do we try to find our value in other people and other things, right? Listen to what David says, because there's a great statement in verse 5. It says, yet, right? Yet. And that's a great transition statement. Everything before it, true, right? We're mere mortals. Why would God think about us? Yet made you only a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. So even though we may not feel valued or worthwhile, yet God thinks so. He's crowned you with glory. He's crowned you with honor. Goes even further. 1 Peter 2:9 says this, but you are not like that, for you are a chosen people. You are royal priest, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness and into the wonderful light. Listen, church, if you don't remember anything else today, like if you check out after this, okay, don't check out. But if you do, just remember that God sees you. He values you. And you are his very own possession. Right? You don't seem as shocked as I do, but that God would call you his very own possession. That he finds value in you. Yet, given all your mistakes, all the terribleness about us as humans, yet he crowned you with glory. I'm not going to stop there, but we could. Genesis 1:27. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So again, we see the use of human beings, the Adam, created in his own image. And there's a distinction here. Because it's no longer human. He separates. There is now male and female. So it has been separated. And why? Verse 28 says this. Then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, govern it, reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground. So clearly God is trying to say that our embodiment is important. That being made in the image of God is important. But it's also important that he separated male and female. That both are made in the image of God. And what are they supposed to do? Be fruitful, fill, reign, subdue. So God has called us in his image to be co-creators with him on earth. He has given us authority over creation. We're co-creators with God. That's what it means to be in the image of God. Genesis 2:7. Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. Now, I don't know why the NLT decided to change man here from human being, but they did. That's what they did. It's the same word as it was before, Adam, okay? So what we have going on here, this very first part, is a play of words in the original language. So God formed the Adam from the dust of the ground, or the Adamah. The Adam was formed from the Adamah. Or you could better say it today, the earthling was formed from the earth. So what this shows us is this symbiotic nature that we have with creation, that God has made us a part of this world. Granted, he has separated us and called us to be co-rulers with him, but we are very clearly a part of this creation. And then the next part's the best part. Ready? He breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils. The man became a living person. So before that moment, we were just a body. But when the breath of life from God entered us, that's when we became a living being. You see, we are embodied souls consisting of both body and soul. Now, we don't have enough time to get into anthropology and theological understanding of that. But just know that you can't have one without the other. That's my understanding of it. That you can't be a body without a soul, and you can't be a soul without a body. Think about when you breathe your last breath, you breathe your final breath, no longer considered living. You're just a body. And the reverse of that is true is when we get our glorified bodies, we are both body and soul. When Jesus was resurrected and he reappeared, he didn't like float around, He was in his earthly body. So our embodiment must be important. And so I titled this sermon, Hey Siri. I gotta say it quieter. First service, it activated my iPad. I call this, Hey Siri, what is a human? And so I kind of said, I did it again. You want to know what it said? Humans are culture primates. Well, we'll get into it. I don't believe Siri on that one. What a good segue. This is perfect. So I named it Hey Siri, what is a human? Because I wanted to talk about what it means to be human. But I also wanted to talk about how culture is beginning to define what a human is. And if we're not careful, we'll let culture dictate what it means to be human. See, when we talk about sex and gender, until 1970, it was all together. Your gender and your sex were the same thing. They didn't separate them. But what we see now in culture is that they're beginning to separate these two. Our biological sex is one thing and our gender is another thing. This is what I know about our biological sex. 4 things. There's a presence or the absence of the Y chromosome. Fellas, I'll let you figure out why it's a Y. Internal reproductive organs. External sexual anatomy. Endocrine system that produces secondary sex characteristics. Every single textbook that you look at will tell you that is what defines biological sex. Those don't change. That's what it is. And that's what it was for the longest time until late in the 20th century where culture started to go, wait a minute. This might be your biological sex, but this gender thing is a whole different thing. It's a whole different understanding. See, culture wants to define it as how you feel, what the psychology of it is, what the cultural norms are, what the social norms are. And what we have to understand is how culture defines it is this. Culture identity, or gender identity, refers to the psychological aspects of being male or female. So this would be like, I was born a man, but I feel like I'm a woman. Or, I was born a woman and I feel like a man. That's what culture is defining gender as. Gender roles describe the social and cultural aspects of being male and female. So this is like somebody that likes classical music or they like the color purple, and they're a man. Purple's my favorite color. Goes against cultural norms, right? But it's my favorite color. Funny story. Most people don't know this, but before my wife and I got here, she was on staff at a church with me. We were working together at a church. She was actually the director of the children's ministry of a fairly large church. So that made her my boss. My wife was my boss, and she's still my boss, by the way. I'm going to get bonus points for that one. But that's an inversion of the gender roles, right? Culture would say your wife can't be your boss. That's weird. This is what culture is doing. It's beginning to separate these two terms for us. And most of the time, church, what we want to do when we hear terms like transgender or gender identity or non-binary, these terms that we hear, we want to begin to step away. We're like, that kind of makes me uncomfortable. I don't really want to talk about that. I got my feelings and my convictions, but I want to keep that here. Let's keep it at arm's distance. Listen, church, we should be the ones entering into that conversation. We have the ultimate example of a person who entered into difficult conversations in Jesus Christ. He had no problem entering into those conversations with love and compassion and care and understanding. And it was never from a place of acceptance, but from a place of love. Think about this. When he would sit at dinner with these people that the religious leaders of the time, right, considered them less worthy, sinful people. You shouldn't be hanging out with them, Jesus. And Jesus sat with them. Now, this isn't like going through the drive-thru at McDonald's, right? Not a sponsor, by the way. They're not getting a sack of hamburgers and hanging out. No, when they sat and ate together in the first century, this was a very, very intimate setting. They are sitting on top of each other. They're sharing food. I mean, John talks about in his gospel where he's leaning his head against Jesus. Like, this was what the dinner table was. It's a lot different than what we think a dinner is. Jesus entered into those conversations with who the religious leaders said are not worthy, and he showed them love and compassion. And if Jesus is to be our ultimate example of what it means to be made in the image, that Jesus is the ultimate embodiment, then we should follow Jesus. This is what I know to be true. The Bible defines biologically, not psychologically, male and female. So I feel like the Bible is very clear from the very beginning that God separated male and female to rule, subdue, and fill the earth. That was God's creation of man and woman in the image of God. I just finished this book called Embodied. And this is what the author, Preston Sprinkle, says. The Bible's primary invitation to every Christian is not to act more like a man or to act more like a woman, but to act more like Jesus. See, understanding the image of God empowers us. It helps us understand how we can walk into any conversation understanding the ultimate embodiment in Jesus. So what do we know about the image of God? Fundamentally, it's how we understand our human nature. So understanding our dignity, our morality, and the relationship between God and us. A couple things that are true about the image of God. Jesus is the true revelation of the true humanity. John 1:14 says this, "So the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son." Jesus is the ultimate example of what it means to be a human. Listen, God called us to be co-creators with him, but we are a lesser image. What's Paul say in Romans? We have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We are a lesser image of God. Made in his image, but a lesser image. Jesus is the ultimate image. Second point, we are unique, yet we are part of creation. Luke 12:7 says this, "And the very hairs on your head are all numbered, so don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows." We already kind of touched on this point, that we are a unique part of creation. All of us are unique. Some of us have 99 tabs open on their phone. And some of us are a little more organized. But we're all unique and created in God's image. Separate, yes, but a part of creation. Which leads me into my next point. We are mysterious. Why you keep 99 tabs open? I don't know. Psalm 139 says this, "Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it." Every single person in here has a different story. We all didn't get to where we're sitting right now by having the same story. We all walk in with our own understanding, our own stories to tell. If you've heard me preach before, you know that I got quite a unique story of how I ended up here. But you have a unique story as well of how you've ended up there. We're all mysterious. We are relational. Matthew 22, verse 37 says this. Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself." Very clearly that God has created us for relationships. Now, why he made it so difficult, I don't know. Remember how we're all mysterious? Yeah. I don't know why he made it so difficult, but he clearly made us for relationships. And sometimes it can be messy and sometimes it can be difficult. But we always feel better when we're in relationships with people. We are responsible. Go back to verse 28. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it, reign over." God has given us responsibilities here on creation, that we're to partner with him to be co-creators, to work with him to further this movement. Next point, we are embodied. 1 Corinthians 6:19 says this, "Don't you realize that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price, so you must honor God with your body." It goes back to the old saying that, like, if Jesus did it, it's kind of important, right? So if Jesus took on the embodiment, flesh, it would seem that it's pretty important that we take care of our embodiment as well. We are broken. Since the fall, we have been broken and need restoration. Genesis 3:7 says this, "At that moment their eyes were open and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves." In the garden, and we all understand what brokenness is. We've felt pain, we felt suffering. These are all emotions that we've all gone through. We know the brokenness of this world. And in that beginning, they had the choice. God said, "You are made in my image. You're going to be co-rulers with me. We're going to co-create together. Just do it my way." But he still gave them the choice. And they said, "You know what? We're going to co-create, reign and rule in our own way." And so their eyes were open and they felt shame. When we try to rule on our own, that's where it ends up. When we don't follow the example of Jesus, that's where we end up. See, the image of God is something to be transformed and renewed. It's not something that's static. It doesn't stand still. It's not like you were created in the image of God and you're done. It's finished. It's something that's supposed to be transformed and renewed. Colossians 3:10 says this, "Put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like him." Romans 8:29, "For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his Son, so that his Son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters." When Paul and the early church had this idea of understanding what it means to be made in the image of God, what they looked at was Jesus. And they said, if we were made in the image of God, wouldn't that follow along that we're supposed to be like Christ? And so Paul's really the first one to kind of put this idea together in Scripture and say, you know what? Being made in the image of God is like being made in the image of Christ. And that's what I should be like. So the renewing and the transforming of our image is supposed to follow the life of Christ. Because Christ is the one that mediates between God and us. We can't do that. There's a book called What God Has to Say About Our Bodies by Sam Alberry. And he says this: in order to be the perfect high priest for us, the one who can perfectly mediate between us and God, Jesus had to be like us in just the right way, and unlike us in just the right way. I love that quote. Because he needs to be unlike us in just the right way, but like us in our embodiment the right way. Jerry, I'm going to ask you to come on up right now. So Jerry's going to make his way up. Because if this embodiment is important, if God has given us this embodiment, that we are body and soul, and we're supposed to use this to glorify, to be co-creators with God, what we do with that is important. But I'm also sensing that maybe we've walked in here with this feeling that something's keeping me from being the true image of God. Maybe there's something in my life that I keep going to that's keeping me from realizing what it is to be made in the image of God. And God might already be poking you right now, letting you know what that is. Maybe it's something you struggle with for years and years. And so what we're going to do is we're going to open up the altar. Jerry's going to play a song. We'll come back and we'll pray together. But I want to read some of Paul's words before we go to the altar. Because I don't know what it is that you brought with you today. I don't know what it is. But God knows exactly what it is. And when we lay it at the feet of Jesus, that's when we begin to be renewed. That's when we begin to be transformed into the image of God. Listen to Paul's words. Colossians 1. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. For through him God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him and for him. He existed before anything else and holds all creation together. Christ is also the head of the church, which is his body. He is the beginning, supreme over all who rise from the dead, so he is first in everything. For God in all his fullness was pleased to live in Christ. And through him God reconciled everything to himself. He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. Listen to this next part. This includes you. This includes me. We were once far away from God. We were his enemies, separated from him by our evil thoughts and actions. Another yet statement. Yet now he has reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in a physical body. As a result, he has brought you into his own presence. You are holy, blameless, as you stand before him without single fault. Church, the altar's open. If you need prayer, come to the altar. If you just need to work on whatever it is that you need to at your seat, God knows. God knows exactly where you are. Once Pastor Jerry finishes this song, we'll come back and we'll close out. Church, would you go ahead and stand with me? I don't know what it is that sometimes makes us feel less than, where we feel like we don't have our value. Sometimes it can be a diagnosis that tells us that we're less than. It could be a relationship that we're in that says we're less than. It could be questions about understanding who we are that make us feel less than. But if we remember anything from God's word today, yet you are crowned with glory. God sees you. He loves you, and he knows you. You are his very own possession. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time. Lord, I think back to David's words that we are unworthy. And it's so true. We are unworthy of your love. We're so unworthy of your care. Why do you care for us, Lord? Yet you've crowned us with glory. We have been made in your image to be co-rulers with you, co-creators with you. Lord, what a responsibility that you've given us. But you didn't leave us on our own. You sent your son to be the walking embodiment of what it means to be human. So, Lord, I just pray now that each and every person in this room would follow that example. They would look to your son, Jesus, to be the perfect, shining example of what it means to be human. That as we continue to be renewed and transformed into his image, that we would be able to show love to those around us, that we would walk into conversations with grace and truth. Thank you for all that you do, Lord. Please be with these people this week, that you would guide them, that you would lead them, and you would show them the true value that they have being made in the image of God. We love you, we praise you, and everyone said, you are sent. We'll see you next week.